was dreaming, thinking, fantasizing murder all day long. I couldn't get it out of my head.
He was the co-ed killer. Taking the head off was his idea of ultimate control over women.
Two hikers were walking their dog up in Loma Prieta, which is way up in the Santa Cruz Mountains. It's the highest point in the county. They came across what looked to be a skull. The reality of finding something like that, it can be a very upsetting situation.
So a call came in to the sheriff's office from two hikers. We drive up on top of this mountain.
They went searching and digging and seeing if there was any area under the trees that were just dug up or anything looked suspicious.
Do you have any idea how large the area to be searched is?
We've got roughly about a square mile at minimum.
We were trying to search for anything that doesn't belong in the dirt, but we find no other body parts. We brought the skull back to the sheriff's office and tried to identify the remains. And we found out the skull belongs to a woman, a young woman, a teenager to early 20s.
I had an upbringing that was, some have called dysfunctional. The whole home life, I watched it deteriorate. I was 7.5, 8 years old. My parents divorced. My mother's working to raise 3 kids. We lived in a house where there was a basement, and at a certain time of the evening, my sisters would go up to bed upstairs, where I used to go to bed upstairs. I had to go down to the basement. I walked into complete darkness with these pipes wheezing and banging over my head. You know, the rattles, the weird sounds in the night that can be spooky to a kid. And I've got this horrible terror going on inside of me. My imagination was vivid.
Kemper was the middle child, the only boy. His mother thought Ed should not be sharing a room with his sisters, so it made sense to her to put him in the basement. Ed presents this living arrangement as sort of a brutal thing for his mother to do because it scared him so much. But she thought Ed was awkward and timid, and so she wanted to toughen him up and also give him a little more independence as a boy.
From the beginning, you had a kind of volatile relationship between his mother and his father. I think it was a very destabilizing time for him, and his mother became the focus in his particular narrative of all of his anger and feelings of rejection.
When I was about 8 or 9 years old, I went to a magic show.
It was a traveling show where they had the guillotine act, where they took a young girl out of the audience, they put her head in the guillotine, they made it look like they chopped it off. and everybody was horrified, and Ed was thrilled.
Right at that moment, I departed reality because logically, I should have been able to ascertain that that could not happen. You're not going to get away with chopping somebody's head off. But the concept of it was so raw and it was titillating. I says, wow. And that got caught up in my morbid fascination.
He had issues with wanting to dominate and control people. And in his mind, taking the head off and possessing it was his idea of ultimate control over women.
It was in that darkness that he begins to really formulate the fantasy of ultimately killing.
When I was 14 years old, I ran away from my mother. I wanted to be with my father, and I wanted to get away from my mother because I was dreaming, thinking, fantasizing murder all day long. I couldn't get it out of my head. I go stay with my dad, and this opened up whole new feelings in me that I'd never had before. And I wish I'd had more experience with my father growing up.
He hated his mother. He loved his dad. That would have been a dream for Edmund to have things work out, living with his father.
Ed's stepmother was absolutely terrified of him.
Ed had this way of looking at people with kind of a weird, empty stare that unnerved her. Finally, Ed's father took Ed to his parents' 17-acre ranch in California, ostensibly to go for a visit over a Christmas vacation. But when Ed's father went to leave, he told Ed, "No, you're staying."
We went up to the mountains to stay for Christmas, and I got left behind.
That was the straw that broke the camel's back. He was mad at everybody in his inner circle that rejected him.
His grandmother was a dominating figure like his mother was, and he began to build resentment toward her because she didn't really trust him. He didn't like being told what to do over and over and over.
She never let me get out of her sight for more than an hour without yelling my name out to see where I was. I would go back to my bedroom, and I'd go off into fantasy worlds that you'd never want to share with anybody because they're so cruel or they're so unspeakably out of sync with reality. I started developing the fantasies toward her, killing her. And in the decapitation fantasies were even there. They were in place by then already. And,
what were those fantasies?
What were they?
Oh, yes.
Possessing the severed heads of women. My grandmother had made agreements with me from the gate that she wouldn't get into little humiliating mind games with me like my mother had done. Well, very soon after that, the mind game stuff started up.
Kemper was prone to sudden rage. It was, "I've had it. She's mouthed off for the last time."
I was really aware of the evil I was capable of. You know, the murderous violence.
And something snaps in his head. He turned a gun on her, and he shoots her in the head.
He then shot her twice more, dragged her body into the bedroom, and he needed to be sure she was dead, so he stabbed her.
He had such rage, he said that if the knife wouldn't have broke under the clavicle of his grandmother, he would have never stopped stabbing.
So now Ed's panicking, and he calls his mother, of all people in the world, and tells her, I just killed Grandpa and Grandma.
Ed learned very quickly the kinds of things the psychiatrists were looking for.
When he's put in an environment with his mother, he began to fantasize about acting out. The unfortunate reality is that upon his release from Atascadero, innocent people would become victims of his fantasy world. Ultimately, Ed Kemper fell into the pattern that you see in some men who commit serial sexual homicide. Aggressive and sexualized fantasies, the feelings of rejection, and then ultimately it spills over into the first act. And then with every killing, there's an attempt to perfect that fantasy until its actual underpinnings are revealed, which is the killing of his mother.
I had a real bad problem depriving people of their lives. It wasn't the aspect of killing them, it was the aspect of possessing their bodies afterwards. So it was almost after an effect, evicting someone from their human body.